Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Rekindling the Magic in Your Family Meetings. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so that you know how to participate in today's event. We've taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right corner. You are listening in using your computer's speaker system by default. If you prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane, and the dial-in information will be displayed. You'll have an opportunity to submit text questions for our presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You can send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We'll collect these. We'll get to as many of them as we can during the Q&A session at the end of our discussion. And now it's time to introduce today's presenters. Barbara Dartt is a senior consultant with the Family Business Consulting Group. She's based in Michigan. Welcome, Barb.
Good morning.
And Joshua Nacht is a consultant with FBCG based in Colorado. Welcome to the program, Josh.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
And I'm Christy Data. I'm going to be your moderator or your MC for today. I'll be kicking us off and helping to wrap up the program and through the Q&A session at the end. Both Barb and Josh have experience with families who are starting family meetings from scratch and also who are evolving an ongoing family meeting program. So they're going to draw from some of the things that they know that many families do to energize and engage family members in family meetings. And yet we also recognize that each family is unique, and so they'll also share some examples of how different families approach their family meetings with the hope that something sparks as relevant to your family. Before we get started, it's important to note that we prize family confidentiality in our work. So we're going to present today a couple of cases of families who have rekindled the magic in their own family meetings. While these cases are drawn from real family experiences, they have been fictionalized for the purposes of today's presentation. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Barb to kick us off.
Thank you, Christy. So Josh and I are excited to be here today. We're going to start with just a little bit of a definition. And I want to talk about what is a family meeting. And so this is a definition we've used at FBCG in the past. So it's a regular gathering, so scheduled and repeated, of family members for the purpose of advancing the family. So it's going to have a mix in the content of family matters and business matters. Often early in the evolution of a family business, it will cover a fair mix of both family challenges or family topics as well as shareholder topics. Sometimes it is heavy on owner content. It's probably not just a shareholder meeting, and it's certainly not just a family reunion where it only includes social events, but it's usually a mix of some of those materials. I think we have a poll, Christy, that we wanted to ask just to get a sense for who has joined us today.
Yeah, we sure do. We're going to kick that off right now. And you'll see this appear on your screen. So the question is, how long have you been holding family meetings? And you can just click and answer real quickly. The first answer is haven't started yet. You've been having them from 0 to 5 years. You've been having them from 6 to 10 years, 11 to 15 years, or 16 or more years. We'll give you just a little bit of time so we can get a bunch of responses.
Wow, these guys have quick trigger fingers. We have 80% voted. Awesome.
Yeah, I'm still seeing some clicking, so I'm going to let it go for just another second, and then we'll go ahead and close it out.
Haven't started yet has really come up there in the poll.
Yes. So here we go. We're going to go ahead and close it now and share the results, which you all should be able to see.
Super.
So yep, go ahead.
Fifth in the haven't started, and then 26% in 0 to 5 years, and then a quarter in the 6 to 10, and then kind of evenly split about 30% out in the farther out groups. Awesome, nice distribution. Good, I look forward to the questions from that. That's really helpful as Josh and I kind of share some details with you. So one more thing to think about as we just go through the definition of what a family meeting is, and Josh and I will hit this a few times here, but you know, a family meeting, it is not a business meeting. And so the kind of decision-making, speed and efficiency, and even the speed and efficiency of discussion or reaching consensus sometimes does not and probably should never look just like the efficiency of a business meeting. That doesn't mean that we don't have structure and think a lot about the process, but it isn't going to be the same kind of meeting that you attend in a business setting. Just want to make sure I mention that. I think the expectations are important. So Josh and I have 3 areas that we want to cover today to kind of address rekindling the magic within your own family meetings. And for the 20% roughly who haven't started yet, I think this is equally applicable. It's a great place to start. So the first thing we'd like you to consider is really go back and reconnect with your why. Start with the foundation of why you're kind of tackling this tough work, and it is challenging. The second kind of pillar is to focus on process, not just on the content, but give at least the same amount of preparation and sometimes more to actually how you're going to deliver things as compared to what you're going to deliver. And the third point is that this is really a marathon, not a sprint, in the family meeting space and the education and relationship building of a family. So don't feel like you have to cover it all at one time. And we'll delve into each of those in a little bit more detail. And we're going to start with your why. That's where we're going to begin. So as you think about, again, rekindling the magic or kindling the magic if you're beginning having family meetings, I think one of the most important kind of fonts, if you will, or connections to develop energy for family meetings is really starting with your purpose. And that's a multi-layer why in some cases. There's really the why of family governance. Why is it that your family has decided to tackle this very challenging and hard work? Holding a family and a business together as you have growth in the family and there's more and more diverse opinions, and then balancing that diversity and breadth with the principles that you all believe to have brought you success as a family and a business, that's increasingly difficult work. And so if we aren't clear about why we're even advancing family governance, you'll falter and it'll be hard to focus. But then I think you need to layer on top of that the why of this particular meeting. I just had a call with a family this past week, and we really went there first, and it was really funny. There's 3 couples that were planning the meeting for next gens that range in age from 20 to 3. It's a big range. And they really went up, they're just beginning this, and their theme clearly was awareness. So this first meeting that we're planning for this summer is about just really becoming aware of what's going on with the family and the business and why they're even there together talking about it. So what we found is, if we're talking about rekindling the magic, if you can connect to this why, and sometimes you have to maybe redefine it, you really have a font of a ton of energy to feed the family meeting itself, and also to connect that family meeting to a broader continuum of why it is that you're attempting family governance. And so a few questions you might ask yourselves about that why, either to kind of test it, is it energetic enough? Does it bring this cohesion you're looking for? Or maybe a way to start connecting with that why, if you don't feel like your why is fully defined, again, use these 3 questions. So the first question is your why meaningful enough to support alignment on tough decisions? And so that's probably more relevant to your family governance why, but it really does need to have some depth and meaning. Again, what's the foundation for why you're attempting all this challenging work, and asking next generations beyond you to do the same. The second question is this why challenging enough to stimulate new possibilities? Does it push you? Is it a vision? Is it exciting and stimulating and attracting? And then the third one is attracting. It needs to be attractive enough to engage a really broad range of ages, geographies, and folks with different capacities of time to commit and to knowledge to commit. And so that's a kind of a way to start thinking about forming up that why or connecting your particular meeting to that why.
These are great questions, Barb, because they're really not singular answers, right? They're answers over time, and they're questions you can continue to ask yourself, whether you're at the beginning and just starting family meetings, or you've done it for 11 to 15 years or longer. Another point that we think is really important is to focus on the process, not just the content. And what we mean by that is the process are the interactions and the activities between people, both business-oriented and family-oriented. Content is the information involved. Content is easy to put on a PowerPoint. Process is how you interact with it and how you interact with one another. So you need both. But it's easy to over-focus on the information and neglect an engaging process in family meetings. We see families can get trapped in an information-only meeting. Maybe it's the business financials or business strategy. They're learning about whatever business or entity that they own together. And we see people sitting around the table meeting in the same type of way, which we call a pattern trap, where you meet around the same table, the same way, the same discussions. And that's where it gets overly focused on content. We have to come back to the process. We feel that the process and that engagement is where you can rekindle the magic. That's where things can get interesting, even as you work with that same information. So we have a couple family meeting points that we like to look at. And these are things to keep in mind as you start to think, okay, how can we plan meetings in a different way? As the family grows, the structure and the approach for the meetings has to keep pace. For those of you who are just starting, or for those of you who can remember back, maybe the first family meetings were around the dinner table. They're very informal, but then as the family grows, the business grows, the meetings have to evolve as well. We're going to talk about this in more in-depth in a couple slides here. Remember that everything is based in communication and relationships. To me, this is one of the distinguishing elements of being a family business, right, is that you have those family relationships. You have the longevity of being a family together, and that also ties into having really good communication together. Now, not every family has good communication, so sometimes you have to build the communication, sometimes you have to build the relationships, and often you're doing both at the same time. For effective family meetings, we really see, they don't happen by accident. They take planning. It takes an investment of time and energy. That's where family leadership can really come in and play an influential role. So individual family leaders can bring in a lot of energy, but they can't do it alone. And so we really support a teamwork approach where there are people whose job it is to focus on the family meetings, building the agendas, and building interesting activities together. That can't fall to the same leader all the time. So that's where a teamwork approach really comes into its own. And then those different people can take different sections. So you mix up who's talking. Another point that we think is important is that fun leads to engagement. It's hard to be engaged over time if you're sitting around the same table, reading the same financials, and you've been doing the same thing. And so when we think of fun, that's both in the meeting and around the meeting as well. And we'll look at some examples of what families have done here. Because what we're really doing is using these family meetings as the forum to help build relationships. Whether you're just starting out or you're a multi-generational family that's been doing this for years, who has cousins working together or cousins owning the business together, we have to continually invest in building those relationships. So let's take a look at a case study and look what a family has done in this realm of process before content. So this family is the Hermosa family. There we go. And they are a manufacturing business in packaging and containers, started in the Los Angeles area. They have 15 primary owners who are spread on both coasts. So they have a geographical spread, a big difference, as well as a cultural difference. I think we all know different areas of the United States have different cultures, and we can see that in this family. They also have an interesting age range. So they range from age 73 to 17. They're G2, still actively involved in the business, even at age 73. They have 3 G3s who are in their 40s and 50s, and their spouses, as well as a 7-member G4 group, that 4th generation, the youngest of which is 17. So they're reaching young adulthood. They're starting, some of them have been attending family meetings. They're starting to get more interested in what it means to be part of this business and to own it together. So traditionally, this is a family that's had a heavy business focus in their meetings, really driven by those who work in the business, whose life and passion is the business, and so they really want to share that with the family. What's happened is that they've overly focused on looking at business results, looking at the business plan, looking at business strategy in these family meetings. And what's happened is that there started to be a declining interest and a declining attendance at these meetings because the family doesn't feel engaged. Some of the family leaders started to see, hey, we need to adjust things here. We want to engage our entire shareholder group. We want to make sure that G4, whether or not they work in the business, is a really active part of the meetings and that they are active owners. Basically, people were starting to go to sleep in meetings and they had to rekindle the magic. So this is a really good example of how family meetings have to evolve over time. So we're going to take a look at that, and then we'll come back to the Hermosa family to see what they did.
So what the Hermosa family encountered is pretty natural. And if you think about how family meetings need to evolve to meet the needs of the family, I think this kind of graphic illustrates it in part. So as the business begins that kind of kitchen table family meeting, you know, often the family gets together on the left. In some cases, I have families that I work with who spend so much time together, both outside of work, they live near each other, they all work in the business. This whole family meeting thing sounds crazy to them because they don't really need to spend any more time together, and all the information that's necessary is sort of transitioned by osmosis or in passing because they're all together. But as we get multiple generations, we get a breadth of owners, non-managing owners and managing owners. We get the same things that the Hermosa family ran into: geographic diversity, cultural and perspective diversity. We need to evolve how family meetings happen. So we've got in the small boxes under that top blue solid arrow, you know, an evolution of the family system itself, right? From parents and growing children all the way over to siblings and cousin parents with next gen siblings and cousins who own and manage the business. You know, and there's no neat, clean, orderly way that this evolves, but in general, as we get that kind of complexity, we need to think about a different approach to family meetings. And so we start with those more informal, as Josh outlined, business approach to the family meeting, where the family meeting itself just happens. And one thing that we see happening around that is the timing of those meetings. So I've got lots of families. Well, I have one family that has their family meeting on the Friday after Thanksgiving every year, and it's you know, just two non-managing owners and one managing owner, and they have next gens that are now getting into college, the G3s, and those guys have significant others, and they're not so thrilled about having to go to the family business side of the family every Thanksgiving, because the Friday is when you're supposed to be there for the family meeting. And so some of that informality has to evolve to take into account those more diverse perspectives. So you generally need more structure, more formality, and a little bit more advanced prep. And really this boils down to more prep, you guys. It's about investing the time and energy ahead of time and a broad set of perspectives so that you meet the needs of a broad family with the family meeting. So Josh, what did the Hermosa family do?
So the Hermosa family, they focused on creating a fresh process to reignite interest in these meetings. They went back and, like Barb touched on, you know, they connected to the why. They developed an updated purpose and vision for the family ownership group.
And Josh, was that inclusive of a generation that maybe hadn't been involved in creating those statements prior?
Yeah, absolutely. It was really inclusive of that fourth generation and of those young adults who, as they started to become involved, you know, the family put out, what is your vision? Do you want to be owning this business when you're retiring? And all of a sudden that brings in a new time frame to these young adults, and that really starts to get them thinking about what's been created and what part they want to play. So that develops that why. Why am I taking the time to invest in this family meeting? What is my role as a family owner? And what this did is this built a sense of commonality and connection across the entire family, across all those generations. Now, the interesting piece here is how they did this. And as they focused on the process, they didn't just sit around the table and say, all right, let's talk about purpose and vision. Because that can be a little challenging. It can be a little dry. And frankly, it sort of mirrored how they had done family meetings before in a very business-first fashion. So what they did is they utilized graphic facilitation to help be more creative in how they were going to think about this. They, utilizing some outside resources, they had meeting rooms that were lined with huge pieces of paper. And what they did is that they dreamed together. What could this look like? What is our vision? And instead of just talking about it, they drew it out. And it didn't matter if they were a good artist, bad artist, everybody can draw, right? They drew their visions, and then they talked with each other about what they meant and what they were. They explained to each other, so they're building communication, they're building relationships. And then they started to distill it down and incorporate the most connective elements together to draw out their vision in a more visual form that then they could put words to. And those words helped build their purpose, their vision, and it connected and built this sense of why.
And Josh, if I may,
yes.
What I found is that probably the most important part of process is that we give families the space to experience each other in a way that's different than the intermittent social connections you might have if you were a non-business owning family. But I have no families that want to do that by holding hands and singing Kumbaya around the fire, right? So it really you really have to have meaningful work around which to do that. But when you use creative and differing experiences and activities like the one Josh just illustrated, it gives both meaningful output and a meaningful activity to engage in together. But if you can get the process right, it really builds the relationships too. And from my business perspective, it's very efficient because you're killing two birds with one stone, right? You're building something meaningful that the family can use in the future, but you're also building relationships at the same time.
Yeah, thanks, Barb. And I think a key point there is that it's meaningful work, right? They weren't just doing this to draw pictures. There's a real deep meaning and sense of purpose behind what they're doing. Another piece that they did is that they used a facilitator to help build a really good, fair process for making decisions. I forgot to mention it on the earlier slide, but this family had a very uneven ownership distribution, where you had one branch owning 65%, one branch owning about 25%, and then the other owning about 10%, which is fairly common in families where ownership is not split equally. But the question it raised, how do we make decisions together? So this is where they brought in an outside facilitator to help them build a process that was very fair, inclusive to all voices present, but also honored there is uneven ownership, and we do have to make some decisions based on that. But if all decisions are made based on that percentage, well, we're not going to have a very inclusive process.
And I just, sorry to interrupt again, but that's one of those places where shareholder and ownership topics overlap heavily with family, right? So this is a family meeting. Should we really be making family decisions based on ownership percentage? Maybe, maybe not. Really, which decisions are family and which decisions are owner? That's the first part. And then, okay, for the family ones, it's not going to be along ownership lines. What's that look like? Sorry.
Yeah, and knowing when you're wearing each of those hats and when you're wearing both at the same time. Throughout this, they really started to pay increased attention to building their communication and relationships. This is something we touched on earlier. They realized that they needed to help the different generations understand each other. So they focused on cross-generational understanding through storytelling. They did this cool exercise where there was a little speed dating where they sat at tables, or there was tables with an interesting question on it, and different family members moved around to different tables, and they just sat and talked with each other about these interesting questions, and then they switched it up and moved to the next. And what it did is really get people to understand each other, who they are, how they've gotten here, and it started to deepen those relationships. They also added this element of fun to every meeting to engage all family members, both during the meetings, like we've highlighted, and then after the meetings as well. You know, they would have people show up early and go out to dinner together, and one time they went bowling together. They just went out and had fun and built that sense of being a family together. After the meetings, they did an escape the room exercise, which helped, you know, it was fun, helped build some teamwork. They've gone rafting together. What they've really done is said, yes, we own a business together, and we're still a family. So let's build our relationships together. Part of that too, they've done some younger generation specific activities, like a movie night and going to the water slide park. So in this next slide, we have some cool pictures here of these examples where we've seen other families capture their family history with video interviews. You know, let's hear those stories. Let's hear how the business evolved. You know, sometimes younger generation, they come into a business and they think it's been here forever. It hasn't. It got built with an incredible amount of hard work, and hearing those stories from older generation members can really help build that connection as a family. Some families volunteer together. You know, this taps into philanthropy. They do activities, they give back to their community. We're big believers in interactive solutions and experiential exercises. Get people out of their chairs and thinking in new ways. Activate those different intelligences and different learning styles. So this family here is doing, you know, a bit of an affinity exercise where there's an interesting question on the wall. People can respond on a sticky note with their own response, and then you put them on the wall. Wow, interesting. Let's look at these different responses and start to distill it down to what we as a family can do together. This is a way creative problem solving. It mixes up how you're interacting. Ultimately, what this does is it starts to re-engage people of all ages. The meetings are interesting, and people want to participate because they feel respected, they feel heard, and they feel engaged, no matter what type of decisions you're making. Another point here is that you have to do these activities over the long term, and this brings us to our next example.
So it's a marathon, not a sprint. You've heard a few ideas already. I think one of the challenges with the content for family meetings, particularly when you're in the mode where we've got owner education or shareholder education going on, and we've got this broad range of ages, every time we get the family together, it's a bit of a different group because we've added spouses or added children, and it's a challenge to feel like you can cover what needs to be covered. I think a couple points around the marathon, not a sprint. One is it's okay. You know, realistically, it's hard, I think, and Josh is in my experience, to get families together to do a meaningful family meeting over twice a year. I mean, I think, you know, there are situations where we've got a big decision or a big topic, but over time, I think twice a year, you know, is sometimes as much as you can expect for folks that are non-managing owners who have other careers and are in different parts of the country. And then the other piece is, you know, Josh just alluded to all those activities to engage people. I think the marathon, not a sprint, is, I mean, you know, if we have a long-term approach to what we're trying to accomplish, that why, with our family meetings, I think it gets easier. You've got sort of you've got a timeline or a thread that's consistent through your meetings, and you can start hanging content on it and start to make sense. Maybe there's a piece that we keep that's consistent every family meeting. I have a family that the founder's name is Ron, and he's the first generation. We are now into third gen owners in the business. And Ron was a unique guy. He spent a ton of time getting to know his grandchildren. He spent meaningful time with all 18 of them, and they have a very deep connection with him. And Ron passed away just a year ago this month, and they are starting every family meeting with a Ron story. And it's it's kind of a way to connect back to their founder, since this generation knows him, and they know that G4, the oldest of whom is 10, doesn't know Grandpa Ron like they did. And it's a way to kind of carry that message through. This is what we're about here, is perpetuating the legacy of our family together, and here's the things that were important to Grandpa Ron. So I'm going to illustrate the marathon, not a sprint, with another case study for you. So I've got the Green family, who is a real estate business. Right now they have 5 owners, and they have 46 family members from G1 to G4. Most of them live within 3 hours of each other. They don't have quite as much geographic diversity as Josh's family did, even though they're larger. They've been having family meetings for around 8 years, and because they're kind of in that G3, kind of nearly G3 ownership, and the senior generation started these family meetings some time ago, 8 years. They've been doing this for a little while. They were really more like glorified family reunions that we were able to hold because the business got everybody together. And now they certainly followed IRS regulations and covered some business content at every meeting. There's no doubt about that. But mostly it was about going to a sunny place during the winter, keeping the family relationship strong, and really focusing on spending meaningful time together away from our local geography and the business so we could focus on each other. In some ways, a little bit the opposite of Josh, right? The genesis of their family meetings was, we want to build ourselves as a family and spend that time together. The business didn't drive it as much. Again, a little bit of education, but not a lot. So we look at this, 46 owners coming, or 46 family members, 5 owners in G2 right now, and the potential for 21, I believe, next-gen owners in G3, and they started to realize, holy cow, we've got some catching up to do. We have the potential to have 21 next-generation owners, only 3 of whom work in the business. They don't know very much about this operation, nor do they know a lot about being an owner, and we have some catching up to do. And so they shifted focus immediately. Their why changed. They got that. They connected with that, and they changed the content and format of these of the family meetings quite rapidly, turned them into a bit of a snooze fest like Josh's were, and really had almost no attendance because they didn't connect the why for the family. Well, the planning group got the why. They didn't really help the family understand why the change. And so they knew the need and saw it coming. When I say they, I mean the planning team saw this need coming and was quite concerned about that risk, but the family didn't realize and wasn't on board with the kind of connection. And they tried to cover everything, was drinking out of a fire hose for the family, and they went to sprint mode when they'd been in marathon mode, and it was a difficult shift. So Josh, do you want to talk a little bit about how we see that in general around balancing perspectives?
Yeah, and this is a very common challenge and an opportunity with families, is that you have to balance and integrate a lot of different perspectives. Again, different ages, even if you live close to each other, people are growing up in different worlds, right? Think of the world that baby boomers grew up in and Generation X and millennials were growing up in very different cultural times. And everybody has a worldview and a perspective that's based on that. And so an ongoing challenge, and like I said, and an opportunity for families is integrating those perspectives. One way to do that is we look at fair process, and that's an agreement amongst the family about how you interact and how you make decisions together. And families can write into this process, a code of conduct, agreements that all voices need to be heard, that we're going to seek to understand each other. And one way we do this is really encourage an equal speaking space. I had one family who actually brought out a timer. It was a very large family meetings, and they could have some people monologue or pontificate, and all of a sudden, you have one person go for 10 minutes. You don't get to hear all these other perspectives. They finally got out a timer. Everybody had 2 minutes, and they dinged a bell at the end of the 2 minutes. And at first it seemed artificial and it kind of raised eyebrows, but what it did is it helped keep people's comments succinct, and it helped ensure that every voice was being heard because they could move around the speaking. Some families use a talking stick or some object that delineates who's speaking, and everybody gets a turn. This is a way of bringing in all those different perspectives. This can work for small groups and large groups. Another way to balance perspectives is to encourage open-ended questions and dialogue. Seek to understand each other. And an open-ended question, like, what do you mean by that, is going to open up more discussion rather than, do you want to do this or that? Well, that's a closed question or a yes-no question. Open-ended questions are going to encourage seeking to understand each other and asking people, okay, I want to know where you are coming from on that, or let's think through the consequences of that decision.
And Josh, another way to ask those open-ended questions and open it up for dialogue is sometimes to get written feedback. So a SurveyMonkey survey or some other tool, a question and answer box or a feedback box that allows, some folks just don't feel very comfortable speaking up and they don't feel articulate in the moment, particularly when you have some real good speakers. It just is hard, but they might be good writers. I've got people always surprise me, and I think one of the most exciting things about family meetings to me is when you leave space like that, the creativity and the talents that emerge they always are phenomenal. But you have to create the space, and I think written feedback is just tapping into another learning style and another way of communication that allows that breadth. And I also think it sometimes starts with some hypothesis at a meeting, so you don't have to start from scratch to create a policy or to even open the discussion. Hey, here's the breadth of perspectives that we gathered in a written way. Let's talk about this. And when you believe that you have a marathon, not a sprint, making this space feels a lot more comfortable. When you think you have to focus on content and not shove it down people's throats, but cover just an aggressive amount of material, we're not going to get these balanced perspectives, and we're not going to have a chance for equal space.
This is a great point, Barb. And I remember one client where there was a woman who was very quiet, and she said, I always feel rushed to have to make a decision, and I need time to think about these things. And she said, would it be okay to write a letter or to write my thoughts down? And from a person who had been very quiet in the meetings, when she wrote out her thoughts, all of a sudden we realized how much she thought about these things, how much it meant to her. But in the meeting, she wasn't as effective speaking. So when she wrote, then that's where her ideas came out. And you know what? She could come back at the next meeting and started to become a much more consistent contributor, where she had been all along thinking about these things. But now she could bring it in a different way. And part of her point was, we don't have to rush to make this decision right now. We can wait, and sometimes we make a better decision, or we come to a better path forward when we take that long view and say, all right, let's decide on the next meeting. Let's sit on it, sleep on it, I can write about it, and we process and we come back and we make better decisions together.
And even meetings themselves, I think if you are having a day-long family meeting and it fits for you, think about doing a half a day, an evening, and the next morning. It does a few nice things, one of which is gives you an evening space to maybe have some social time. But I think that thinking space is really critical for some family members, and they can come back in the next morning, especially if you give them a set of thought questions, 2 or 3 questions to reflect on at the end of the day, and you come back and hit those at the beginning. You really get a lot more meat from a broader proportion of the family than if we were trying to cover that in the same hours but in one day.
This too is a great point. I think we've all been in family meetings and we come out really tired. And it's because it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of thinking. And breaking it up, like Barb mentioned, overnight, that can be a great way to help people process, think about things, and come back fresh in the morning. And I've seen families grapple with something all afternoon. We finally take a break, and in the morning, they get it. It's like all the pieces come together. Yeah, and you can really see, all right, they thought a lot about this, and you can move forward with a fresh perspective. You know, all this builds authenticity and honesty. What we're really working towards is building trust as a group, and people being able to say what's on their mind in an authentic manner, in a way that's respectful, and this builds trust together. Like we've talked about, this last point is avoiding pattern traps. And a pattern trap is what I call when the family does the same thing in the same way over time, and they don't know how to get out of it. You know, it's like, it's the groove. This is what we do. This is what we've always done, and we don't know how to do anything different. This taps into some of those ideas we've talked about building engagement, building different ways of thinking about things, so you don't just do it the same way all the time, because that can be a difficult way to integrate new perspectives. When you bring in some of these creative ideas, it gives a chance for these other perspectives to come in, for family members who might be more quiet to have a chance to speak, or like in our example, to write, and to bring in these different perspectives, because simply you're doing that process in a different way. So,
oh, go ahead, Josh.
No, go ahead, Barb.
The challenge, I think, for a family that's in a pattern trap, if you're the planning team, I think sometimes it can feel pretty risky to try something different, because you feel like you're going to get some significant resistance from a broad range of the family. And I think in that case, you need to go back to some, which would be classic kind of board management approaches. So if you're the family counselor, you're the planning team, and you know you've got a few champions in the family that are going to be energized by this change, but we suspect that we're going to have a bulk of the family that's going to resist a little, then go to those champions and ask them to have some conversations with people, and ask them to use their influence to just give it a chance. Get a couple of those folks that you think might be deep resistors either on the planning team or engaged in planning an activity or two, so that they feel like they've got some influence over what's happening. The longer those patterns go, the harder it is to break them sometimes, and the riskier it feels. But I think there's, and also I would encourage you to two things. The first time you try a new format, it's not going to be perfect. That's okay. It never will. It's all right. Some things you're going to try and they're going to work, and sometimes they're not, and that's all right. And then the second thing is, don't give up on it, because you will have some wins and some losses as you try and change the culture and format of these family meetings. And just make sure you've got a good evaluation process, bring it back and use what worked, but don't snap back to that pattern. It'll take significant energy and prep. And remember, I said it just really comes down to somebody on the planning team's got to put the time in. But you'll have a little bit more effort then. Again, use what worked. Let's let go of the things that didn't, and try and come back at it again and make it comfortable for people. But you will have to stretch folks a little. So this is about balancing making safe space and making people feel comfortable, and stretching them a little, because they may feel a little out of their element, especially if you've been in a pattern for a long time.
Let's take a look at what the Green family did to help sustain this over time. And I noticed with this last point, and I see a question about, should family meetings always be facilitated by a non-family facilitator, or when can the family self-facilitate? And Barb, let's go over the Green family, and then let's address that question, because I think that's a really good one.
Perfect. So the Green family was in a little bit of a rut, and it might be a rut none of us would want to get out of, which is, hey, let's go to a fun tropical location and just get together and enjoy each other as a family, right? But they had this upcoming ownership shift that really was raising the stakes on what they needed to accomplish in the family meeting. So they had a non-family CEO really influence the family CFO, which is kind of an interesting dynamic, to think about this fire hose approach in a little different way. And they had a couple kind of right brain or creative type family members who worked with that CFO to creatively deliver, slow down first, and then creatively deliver financials. And so they had somebody who, back to Josh with the graphics, who took the financials from the CFO. And you have to tread carefully here, because this was a family member. They knew the financials very well. They were very, very strong in finance, just not so hot, right, at engaging people and educating. That's a whole nother job, to be an educator. And so they took the financials, and again, it was really in this family very pivotal that the non-family CEO kind of paved the way for this planning committee. But they created financials that took up, it must have been 25 slides with very condensed pieces of the P&L and the balance sheet by slide, with call outs There were little scavenger hunts on the financials. Can you find the equity? You know, we just went over that. Can you go find it? What page is it on? You know, and there are prizes for finding it. Again, you know, just real basic stuff, but it was engaging people and making them active, putting them in small groups and having them do some of the ratios, and then, you know, competing on pace, competing on accurate answers. They really just made it more engaging and kind of small team learning environment and some peer learning. They did have an education committee, and they backed up and took this longer view, as we've talked about. So they realized that, okay, we are not going to get all this content in the next 2 years, and that's okay. And how are we going to reinstitute the fun piece? We've got to ensure people know that we're going to make sure we have fun. And then they tested. They added another testing question, an assessment question to their agenda. Besides the connecting to their why, they also did a don't be boring policy. So, okay, how long are we going to make people sit and kind of listen to slides? And boy, we really think 15 minutes is as long as we're going to go in any of our meetings without breaking it up and doing something different, moving chairs, you know, moving groups, doing activities, answering a question, something. So they really focused on that. And you know, like I said, the talents and skills of family, it almost always exists within your family, you guys. It's just a question of, have we asked the right folks to participate, and do we have the kind of planning team structure and format so that we can appropriately engage them. And that's one, and I know families who are challenged by the creatives in their family, right? So we're a little afraid to ask Aunt June to do this because she's going to make a 7-hour theatrical production out of the financials, right? And we can't have that. If we have our why and we have our purpose, then it's not you limiting Aunt June. It's the purpose and the why saying, Aunt June, that's great, but we only have half an hour for this content. So how can you make this creative in a half an hour, not in a full-on play production, right? So it's that effort and energy that goes into kind of engaging that diverse set of voices. And then the last point on there is, you know, they use outside facilitators. Sometimes it's really helpful to have non-family members leading some of these exercises, particularly when you're getting people uncomfortable. And another point here, and in this family it was a little less important, but I have seen it very important in some families, more sometimes in Josh's type of family, the Hermosa family, where you've got established power in senior generations and in ownership branches. And if we can do an activity that sort of makes everybody equal, it's really, it can shift the discussion. And this family did an exercise where it was very deliberate about who was in each group. It was a mix of generations and genders, and they had to do a blindfolded tent building exercise. And when the CEO had never built a tent before, and he had to lean on the married-in that, you know, was his niece's husband to give instructions on building a tent, that's very equalizing from a power perspective, and it really helped folks see each other in a different way. But that it engaged them along an exercise that met with the purpose of that meeting. It wasn't just a fun exercise, but totally unconnected from the theme. It really matched up with the theme and brought them together. And so that's what the Green family did.
And I think, you know, to help address that question and this point, outside facilitators can really help when you need to break out of that rut, out of that groove or pattern trap. And like Barb said, if you're going to do something that might be a little more provocative, is going to get people out of their comfort zone, that can be an area where an outside facilitator can really help. If you have a family member who is very actively engaged and willing to invest the time and energy into mixing up how the family meeting is run and learning about some of these different ideas and bringing in exercises, that can be an area where the family can self-facilitate. But just be aware that family members who are facilitating a family meeting sometimes have to take a step back from really being part of the process because they're attending to the entire meeting. That can be an advantage, but you can also lose, you know, some of that brain power, and you can lose a family member who's trying to look out for the whole, who may not be able to participate in the same way. So we see a bit of both as being a really effective way. We also see sometimes it can be hard to airdrop in an outside facilitator unless they have a very specific area of expertise that you're bringing them in. Having a relationship with that facilitator tends to produce better results over time, even if that person is not there at every single meeting. They know the family, they know the process.
And they know who tends to speak and who doesn't, and they can draw folks out. It's just, and they also understand your why and your long-term goals, and I think can match activities. We do have a question, Josh, that says, how do you determine groups? Are they prearranged? We find the same groups stay together if we don't assign folks. I tackled that a little bit, and I think sometimes it's okay to count off and make it random, but if there's particular purposes you're trying to achieve with a given activity, then I think that should be what drives whether you pre-assign a group or not. So the one I mentioned was, we've got different generations because we wanted, this wasn't my stated goal for this activity, but part of the purpose was we kind of wanted to equalize power, the feeling of power among the group, and so then we were very deliberate about assigning who was in each group.
So we want to make sure we leave time for some questions and answers. So I'm going to move on to our recap here, and we really want you to remember these 3 points. You know, start with your why. Remember your purpose, both for the big picture and then for each individual meeting, how that fits into your bigger purpose. The process are those interactions and activities that you do together that help synthesize the information, which is the content. The process is how you're going to get there. And it's a marathon, not a sprint. Take the long view. Many family businesses have been around for decades, multiple generations. You're not going to get it all done in one meeting. You're not going to get it all done in 1 year. So take the long view, pace yourself, and build a comprehensive plan that takes place over time. And don't underestimate the prep time it takes to have effective family meetings. It is an investment of time and energy, no matter who's doing it. It can be a very worthwhile investment, but it can be a part-time job helping formulate these family meetings. And we think maybe there's nothing more important. Do you have anything to add before we do the questions and answers, Barb?
No, I'll turn it over to Christy and let her direct us. I'm looking through the questions now and I see good ones. So go ahead, Christy, tell us where we should go.
Absolutely. We do have several who've come in, and certainly we'll accept a few more, and hopefully we'll get through a couple of them here before we conclude today. One of the questions that popped up that I know we hear often, and I think as you think about engaging different demographics is good to address, is at what age do you think that children should begin to join family meetings, or how do families make that decision?
I think we just had this discussion with the family that I was mentioning the other night, and I hear this regularly. I think some part of the family meeting, it should be attended by everyone. And if you have babies, the babies should be there. I mean, I think sometimes it's not the fun part. Sometimes it's the Ron story part, right? Sometimes everybody ought to be there. When you get to the education part, I think is when you have to be real sensitive to the age and the age in the room, and you aim at the ages you've got. Sometimes if you've got a big enough family, you break folks out by age. I've seen families include 10-year-olds, and I've seen them say they need to be 16. I think each family needs to grapple with that topic and address it based on kind of the maturity. And again, the why. What are we trying to accomplish here? Can an average 10-year-old really accomplish that? And that's how you do it. But I do think inclusion of the entire family at some point in these family meetings is important. And Josh, I'd welcome your input on that. And I would just say babysitters then it's often a function of the budget to include babysitters so that families with children who are younger than the age group are free to attend, or parts of their family can attend without having that burden.
Yeah, I would agree. I really favor an inclusive approach to family meetings. I really believe in education, age group specific educational topics, for young adolescents and young adults. And then I would also add that, our brains, we think of adolescents and young adults, and our brains go through interesting changes. From basically 20 to 25, our brain is still developing. And those young adults, their decision-making capabilities really come online from age 22 to 25. And so you'll see a big change in these young adults, how they can pay attention, how they can process information. That's not to say an 18-year-old can't be a very active and engaged and attentive part of a family meeting, but in general, you'll see young adults from that 22 to 25 really start to display a better ability to engage and think about some of these more business-related topics.
It's a little bit like when your toddlers are trying new foods and you try it once and they spit carrots all over you. You can't quit trying carrots, you guys. You got to go back to the carrot. You don't know. They might decide next week that they like carrots. But I would also say it's a balance between setting the expectation that these folks are active members of a family and a family business, and so we expect them to be there, with how long can a 12-year-old really sit there and be attentive and not distract. But I don't think it's a great idea to say, oh, you're not old enough, you can't come, or you don't have to come, you're not old enough. I think that doesn't set an expectation where you're a meaningful part of the family business.
Great. There's another question here in terms of if you have people who opt not to participate, either they don't attend or they don't engage in the meetings. How do you handle people who won't attend the meetings and still, carry this sort of initiative forward?
Well, I think you may not get 100% attendance, and part of being a family is accepting one another and recognizing that different people have different interests in life, different capabilities, and you may not be able to get every family member to every meeting. We would like that, and hopefully some of what we've talked about makes them more engaging, more interesting, and building that culture of inclusivity, and also recognizing that most families do have a black sheep. Many families have people who aren't as engaged, and you just do the best job you can for as many people as you can.
And I think a couple things, if you haven't already, I think the planning team or the family council chair may just approach them and ask them, hey, we'd love to have you there. What would it take? If that's a possibility, so you might attempt a one-on-one conversation if you haven't already. And then I think make them so darn interesting and fun that they want to come, right? Make it a bit of a challenge and see if you can, gin up enough energy in the rest of the family that people kind of hate to miss it.
Absolutely. Good. We have a question here about, this kind of touches on the inclusiveness, right? So spouses, what do you see as common in terms of including spouses in the meeting? Are there portions of meetings maybe where people are or aren't included? How do families approach that, and what do you think that they should think about?
Go ahead, Josh.
Me? Okay. Well, we see everything across the board. I have seen families where spouses are not included in any ownership meeting because spouses don't actually own. I've seen families be very, very inclusive, recognizing that whether or not a spouse is included in the family meeting, they are very much part of the family, and their influence and their voice will be there whether or not they are allowed in the meeting for some or part of it. I see families who tend to succeed over time tend to be more inclusive in their stance, but they also do a very good job about bringing spouses in to the system, bringing spouses into the family, and teaching them what it means to be part of a family business. Barb?
I think, if you could start with a clean slate and have no baggage, which is, never happens in a family business, it's just a poor assumption, I think you'd be as inclusive as you could be. And remember that the generation before, who seems part of the family, they were married in at one time too. And so when is it that you kind of graduate to be enough of the family to be part of these meetings? And further, when the next gen comes online, how does it feel to have one parent at these meetings, but one parent not at these meetings because they're a spouse? I think inclusivity, if we start with some of that history, has to be taken on gradually. We can't go cold turkey on it, but Josh and I would both strongly agree that the inclusiveness to start out with is helpful. It doesn't mean, as Josh said, we don't break groups out. Often the next gen ought to spend some time together in a piece of the meeting or a breakout group or a retreat where they get to develop that relationship. So maybe you have a kind of family owners meeting that looks different than a family meeting. I think that's fair game. But we kind of need to undergird that with inclusivity, if we can, at the right stage for every family.
Perfect.
Always remember your every decision, all these questions, you're building a family culture. You have to look at the culture you want to create, both now and into the future with questions like this.
Great. So we wanted to let you know about a couple of resources that are coming to all of you after the session. So we have articles on the website, a series of books. The Family Business Advisor newsletter is a free monthly resource for family businesses that comes to you by email. And also we have an event coming up in the fall called the Family Governance Forum for people who may have leadership roles in planning family meetings and these sorts of activities. You'll be getting an email. You'll actually get two emails in the next 2 days or so. One will include the recording of today's webinar, and also one will include the slides and a list of additional resources that you can take advantage of. Also, our presenters today, Barb and Josh, suggested a few additional books that could be good sources for some of these fun activities or facilitation techniques to help you mix up and engage with people as we go through planning these programs, and that you'll also get information on how to access those, so if that's something that you're interested in. With that, we'll go ahead and close out the program today. You'll also receive a survey about your experience with us today. We'd love to hear your feedback. That's very much appreciated. If you'd like to reach out to Barb or Josh or myself, our contact information is here. You'll also get that in the email. We're happy to follow up, provide you with additional resources. Thank you, Barb and Josh, for being a part of the program today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And thank you to everybody who attended. It was such a pleasure to have you, and we'll hope to hear from you in a future program.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.